I never expected a simple visit to my old property to turn into the biggest shock of my life. For years, that land had been untouched, 30 acres of quiet, open space that once belonged to my grandfather. After his passing, I kept it mostly vacant, planning to build something meaningful one day. But life got busy, and I didn't visit for months. When I finally drove up the dusty road, expecting to see the same wild trees and empty fields, my jaw nearly hit the ground. Standing there were not 1, not 10, but 35 fully built houses, complete with pastel paint, garage doors, manicured lawns, and mailboxes lined in straight rows, like a freshly minted suburb. I thought I had taken a wrong turn. I checked the map twice. It was unmistakable this was my property. My shock quickly turned into disbelief. How could anyone build this much without my knowledge? I walked around, snapping pictures, trying to understand what had happened. Residents were out walking their dogs, watering gardens, and chatting as if everything was completely normal. Some glanced at me, annoyed, like I didn't belong there. Little did they know the reverse was true. I was the one who owned every inch they were standing on. I headed straight to the county office. That's where everything made sense and made me furious. The lady behind the counter told me the HOA representative had submitted documents claiming the land was abandoned and that the owner was unreachable. They filed fake paperwork, forged signatures, and built an entire neighborhood in my land. The county inspectors clearly hadn't done their job, and the HOA had taken advantage of every loophole they could by the time I left the office. Anger simmered inside me like boiling water under a lid. Building even a shed on someone's land without permission was illegal. Building 35 houses, that was theft on a massive scale. They thought I wouldn't return, wouldn't notice, wouldn't fight. They thought they could take what belonged to me because they had power, money, and the confidence of people who believed they were untouchable. But they were wrong. I wasn't abandoning anything. I wasn't letting anyone steal my grandfather's legacy. If anything, they just awakened a storm they didn't know existed damned soon enough. They would learn exactly who they'd messed with. The first confrontation happened the very next day. I returned to the neighborhood that shouldn't have existed, determined to speak to whoever was in charge. As soon as I parked near the community sign, a woman in oversized sunglasses stormed toward me like she owned the world. She didn't even say hello. Instead, she demanded to know why I was trespassing in her community. Her tone alone could peel paint off a wall. Ah yes, the infamous HOA Karen. I calmly told her I owned the land and wanted to speak with the association's president. She laughed and said, "Sweetheart, this land belongs to the HOA now. We've developed it, we've improved it, and frankly, we've civilized it." Her arrogance was staggering. She blocked my path with her clipboard as if that cheap plastic shield could stop me. Within minutes, more HOA board members gathered, surrounding me like I was some criminal. They insisted I leave immediately or they would call their security team. One man puffed his chest like a rooster, telling me I had no idea who I was dealing with. I smiled because, ironically, they had no idea who they were dealing with. I pulled out the property deed and held it in front of them. They didn't even look. Karen folded her arms and said, "Fake, we already submitted the real documents. This land is under HOA jurisdiction now." Their confidence in their lies was unbelievable. They had no idea that the moment they threatened me, they'd crossed a line they couldn't return from. Instead of arguing, I recorded everything. Their threats, their claims, their refusal to look at legal documents. When Karen leaned in and said, "You'll regret challenging us," I almost laughed. Because behind my calm expression was a years-long career they knew nothing about. I had experience dealing with disputes far more complex than a rogue neighborhood. People who had tried to intimidate me before ended up wishing they'd stayed silent. As I walked back to my truck, HOA members shouted after me, calling me a trespasser. But inside, I wasn't angry anymore. I was determined. They built on my land, tried to bully me, and acted like the law didn't apply to them. They believed I was powerless. They would soon discover that I had something far more dangerous than anger or frustration. I had leverage, and I had a plan they couldn't see coming. Most people don't know what's built on their land besides grass and trees, but my grandfather had been a brilliant man. On the edge of the acreage, hidden behind dense brush and rock, he had constructed a small but powerful private dam decades ago. It controlled the water flow of a creek that passed directly next to the property. The dam had originally been used to irrigate crops, but it also had another function one nobody but our family knew about. It could release a controlled surge of water downstream, enough to flood low-lying areas temporarily. And guess where the HOA built their shiny little neighborhood? Directly in the low-lying basin. When I revisited the dam, I brushed off old branches and vines hiding the structure. I tested the mechanism. It still worked beautifully. The HOA had stolen my land, built illegally, forged documents, and then tried to intimidate me. But they forgot the most important part. This was still my property, and everything on it belonged to me, including the dam. I wasn't planning to destroy anything. I wasn't trying to hurt people, but a controlled release, enough to send a strong message without causing real harm. That was a lesson they desperately needed. Before doing anything, I documented the entire structure, ensured the safety measures were intact, and checked the runoff path. The last thing I wanted was innocent families suffering because of the HOA's corruption. But I also knew something else. A minor flood would expose the HOA as fraud. The county would investigate. Insurance companies would show up. People would ask why the HOA built houses in a flood zone without permits or environmental checks, and every trail would lead straight to the forged papers. Still, I didn't open the gates yet. I prepared everything legally first. I filed complaints, submitted the deed, contacted the county, and gave the HOA fair warning. Karen responded with a cease and desist letter accusing me of harassment. That letter became the final push I needed. They wanted war. They were about to get one, just not the kind they expected. Standing there, hand on the dam's release wheel, I felt no anger, just justice. It wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. And the HOA was about to learn that nature doesn't listen to Karen's rules. The morning I opened the dam was calm, almost peaceful. The sky was clear, birds were chirping, and the neighborhood was just waking up. It almost felt symbolic. Nature itself was still, waiting for what came next. I turned the steel wheel slowly, letting the release gates open just enough to let the water surge through. The rumbling started soft and grew louder, echoing through the trees like distant thunder. Within minutes, the creek swelled. Water rushed into the basin where the HOA homes sat proudly. Lawns vanished under swirling currents. The perfectly paved streets glistened as water swept through them. Residents came outside confused, staring at the flowing water, wondering what on earth was happening. Then panic spread. People began shouting. Karen came storming out of her house, screaming into her phone, probably calling the same security team she had threatened me with. But this wasn't destruction, it was exposure. The controlled flood was mild knee-high, at most, but powerful enough to reveal everything the HOA had tried to hide. Cracks appeared in sidewalks, showing the rushed construction. One foundation shifted, revealing cheap materials. And worst of all, for the HOA, the county emergency teams rolled in immediately. Officials examined the flooded neighborhood, shaking their heads as Karen tried to blame me. But the truth came out quickly. The county inspector discovered the houses were built without proper environmental clearance. The aftermath was a storm. The HOA couldn't escape. Investigations began, immediately legal, financial, environmental. The fraudulent paperwork traced straight back to the HOA board. Members resigned overnight. Some tried to disappear. Others begged the county for leniency, but it was too late. The evidence was overwhelming. Residents demanded refunds and compensation. The developers involved were sued. The county apologized publicly for failing to verify permits. The HOA was officially dissolved within weeks, and the neighborhood was condemned as unsafe for permanent housing. Suddenly, the same people who had tried to force me off my own land were packing up moving trucks, leaving behind the dream homes they thought would last forever. As for Karen, she tried to blame me for everything, but with video evidence, deed documents, recorded threats, emails, and the discovery of forged signatures, she had no defense. She was charged for fraud, property theft, and falsifying legal records. Watching her face when the officers escorted her away, that was the moment I knew justice had finally caught up with her. Once the land was cleared and returned to me officially, I visited it again. This time the homes were empty, the streets quiet, the lawns overgrown. It didn't feel like loss, it felt like restoration. I stood where the first house once stood and took a deep breath of the open air. My grandfather's land was mine again. No HOA, no threats, no lies. I didn't rebuild immediately. I wanted to do things the right way: legal, safe, transparent, maybe a park, a farm, or a retreat center. Something that honored my family, not something stolen through arrogance and fraud. The HOA thought they could erase me. They thought power and paperwork made them untouchable. But in the end, the truth drowned them literally and legally. And that's how I took back my land, exposed their biggest scam, and watched justice flow just like the waters from the dam.